Today is day 6 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. Ian Whiffen is back on the stand. He's from Celebrate. He's the forensic analyst for Celebrate, and he's being cross-examined by Mr. Alessi. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. This was a snooze fest for me. I think a lot of Alessi's points maybe landed with the jury, but a lot of it was really boring. It was very tedious. He did jump all over the place quite a bit, so it was hard to follow, and it's hard to digest because it's a lot of information. There are a few points that Alessi is mentioning that he has made in his report, but he is not mentioned in that timeline. I told you about the PowerPoint presentation that he made that was super easy to follow. Certain things are not in that PowerPoint. One of the things is at 12:25:30, the device is known to be moving from the roadside toward the house. It's not in the whole timeline presentation he did, it's only in the report. He says he didn't put it in that timeline because the accuracy at that point is declining, but the evidence shows that it was moving towards the house. This window is then followed by 12 minutes of low accuracy data, and this could be because of a building, someone entering the building with a phone, the phone being in a hard to reach area. It could have to do with the weather too. Mr. Alessi wants to make the point that at that time then, the data shows that the phone could have been inside the house, and he says that's correct. Mr. Alessi wants to know if Ian Whiffen has had any conversations with Nick Guarino. Nick is the one who did the download in the Celebrate extraction. He wants to know if you and Nick Guarino ever had a conversation about the distance from the flagpole of the Alberts house to the front door being 72 feet. And at this point, Alessi is trying to connect the dots that John walked 84 feet at this window, and the flagpole to the front door is shorter than that, so he could have made it inside the home at that point. They get into some of the temperature data. In December 2024, he did a test with a phone in a freezer. When the phone was in the freezer, not like wrapped in anything, it drops 50 degrees in 15 minutes. He also mentions that he doesn't know what the temperature was in Canton on January 29th. And according to the report from the Celebrate extraction, the temperature data on John O'Keefe's phone says that at 1:36 a.m., it was 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Several hours later, about 4.5 hours later at 6:06 a.m., the temperature is only 7 degrees lower. So it had only dropped 7 degrees. So that test that he didn't really comprehend what he was trying to explain in the report. This is when I was extremely confused. I was also super busy, so I didn't get to go back and watch it. But they start talking about the Hoslong to die in the cold search. The term hash value or hash signature is being brought up. And then there's some questioning about December 2024. You had an issue with the hash value with the phone. He says no. He says because he didn't do the report, he couldn't validate the hash value. Basically, the hash value is like the signature from the phone. He couldn't validate that because Nick Guarino is the one who did the download, not him specifically. And that is kind of like the tattoo or like the fingerprint of the phone. He says that it could have been modified or tampered with, which is the first time I've really heard this. So Alessi is alleging that somebody within the state trooper's office potentially modified that information. Another confusing point was Celebrate showed it as a deleted record. Since then, it's been changed. They moved it from the physical analyzer program after the first trial. There's been a ton of data that showed that Jen McCabe had not deleted anything on her phone except this one search. In June 2024, Celebrate did not show the 2/27/40 timestamp. It was shown in a second program as a deleted record. Like it didn't even come up in the Celebrate report originally. There is some redirect from Hank Brennan. He has Mr. Whiffen do some examples on his computer. Very confusing. Alessi has another question. He says, when did you create this example? And he says, today. This is after Celebrate has changed their formatting. So now that deleted file is not showing up deleted anymore. So it's all just, it takes forever. First of all, it goes through lunch and it is very confusing. We come back from lunch and Jen McCabe is on the stand. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. I'm not gonna lie, she does look gorgeous. The woman has a blowout. Her hair has kind of been highlighted. She has a spray tan. That's a spray tan. I don't care if she spent any time in Florida. She got a spray tan before this. And her tooth is not as noticeable. I know a lot of people said she had like a snaggle tooth last trial. She looks great. I'm going to try to go really quickly through this and read through my notes so I can do this all in one part. She's married to Matt McCabe. She has 4 daughters. They live in Canton. She met John O'Keefe when her 3rd daughter was in kindergarten, and that's when John's sister passed away, and he took over custody of his niece and nephew. That year, she took an active role in helping John with the kids, specifically Kaylee, because their daughters were the same age and they played a lot of the same sports. The weekend of January 28th, the impending snowstorm, some of the sports that they had been canceled, so that night they went out. She met her sister, who is Nicole Albert, and brother-in-law Brian Albert and Brian Higgins at the waterfall. Chris Albert was there also. She said she got there about 9 p.m. They stayed a little past midnight. Estimates that she had 2 to 3 drinks. Brennan is moving this along too. It's lovely. It's not like Lally, like, what was everyone drinking? Like, he's getting it done. Brennan brings up the surveillance video from the waterfall, identifies everyone as best as she can. She says that at some point Karen Reed wanted to go over to D&E Pizza. That's that restaurant that Chris Albert owns. They've done that before. And Brian and Nicole Albert said that they were going to go back to their house for Brian Jr.'s birthday celebrations. People were back at the house. And that's when they invited everyone to come back. Jen had the understanding that Karen and John were both coming back to Brian and Nicole Albert's house. And Jen left the waterfall and drove to her sister's house with her husband only in the car. She said that she did see John and Karen leave at that point. When they arrived at her sister's house, there was a Jeep already there parked in the street, and she saw that her brother-in-law and her sister were already home. She went inside. Julie Nagel was there, Sarah Levinson, Caitlin Albert, who is her niece, and her nephew Brian Jr. was there. It was his birthday. They were sitting at the table. And then she kind of just gets into that she did know Julie Nagel has dog sat for Jen McCabe's dog before. And Nicole was in the kitchen. All the kids were in the kitchen, but Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were in the TV area. And supposedly you can kind of see the TV area from the kitchen. John had texted Jen on the way over where to. So Jen just called because she was driving, and she used Bella's house as a point of reference. And there's a sidebar called about this. The defense doesn't want it brought up that actually Bella's mom and John O'Keefe used to have a relationship before. So eventually she's inside the house, her sister's house, and she sees a dark SUV outside. Assumed it was Karen's. She doesn't remember exactly, but how many, she looked outside. She thinks it's about 3 times, and the car was in front of the driveway, then the flagpole, then just a little bit past the flagpole. That's when she texted John here. They had a phone call and spoke for 7 seconds, and then the car was gone. She just assumed that the 2 of them had left. She says that John never came into the house. So the events of that evening, everyone's in a good mood. Everyone's having fun. They look up It's Raining Men video on her phone. They're all just singing, dancing, drinking, and they all decided to start going home. Brian Higgins was the first to leave. Then a little later, her and her husband left. They took Julie and Sarah home. Caitlin was at the door, who's her niece, waiting for Tristan, her husband, to come pick her up. They drop off Sarah and Julie on the way home. They get to their house. She goes up to her bed and she Googles a few things regarding her daughter's sports team. And then she goes to bed. She's woken up to a phone call from Kaylee's phone at 4:53 a.m. Kaylee is John's niece. And it's Karen and Kaylee, and Karen is screaming. She says that John didn't come home last night. They got into a fight, and she doesn't know where he is. She thinks that she left him at the waterfall. I don't know if I'm going to get this done in less than a minute, but they hang up. Jen calls her friend Julie Albert and Chris Albert because she thinks that they were at the waterfall. They don't answer. Her husband Matt wakes up and he's like, no, wait, we saw them at your sister's house. So this is when she starts to offer assistance. She calls Kaylee back and they start to come up with a plan, and Karen drives over to Jen's house. On the phone though, Karen does say that she has a broken taillight. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Jen gets out of bed and Karen is at her house, and Carrie Roberts has also come over too. The 3 of them in 2 cars drive over to John's house looking for John. They don't see him anywhere. They're leaving. Karen pointed out to Jen and Carrie the cracked taillight. They got into Carrie's car. They're driving to Fairview. They approach the flagpole area, and that's when Karen jumps out of the car and sees Jen. Jen is the one that called 911. She helps with chest compressions. She said it felt funny, not normal, and she did compressions until the police arrived. That's everything from Jen McCabe for the day. The judge does make the ruling that she is going to allow the ARCA experts to testify. She says the most important thing is the defendant's right to a fair trial.